Good afternoon, my name is Vanessa de la Guardia and I'm here with Dr. Eric Vanderberg, and today we're gonna try to discuss in a little kind of short interview about some of the main problems about climate change. And yet we know that in these days climate change is like a very common topic, but there also exist like many myths that are distributed in the social media, and now we're gonna try to verify some of them. And my first question to the doctor here is that we know that there have been a lot of researches on the patterns of the climate in the history of the planet, but there in these tests and these statistics we know that some eras before there were like higher temperatures than what we have now. So do you think that the effects of the actual increasing of the temperature are bigger than before, or that we can survive with these effects?
There's no question that it's not going to affect our survival. The historical temperatures during the Cretaceous and Jurassic periods, when the periods of the dinosaurs, they were 10 degrees warmer. And here we're getting all worried about 1 or maybe 2 degree change. That's not very much in the scheme of things. So, yeah, no problem.
So another question would be that now that everybody said that climate change is affecting the production of food worldwide, don't you think that, don't you know if it's making something good too on the amount of production or the distribution of food, or I don't know?
Yes. Well, as the term implies, change is not always bad. We focus, or the media focuses on the negatives. So if one area gets less rain or food production drops in one area, we all point to that and say how terrible it is. But when food production increases, we stay quiet and we don't say anything. Okay, right now, much of Canada and Siberia is a sheet of ice. So when that sheet of ice disappears, we go, oh, poor polar bears. The polar bears are not happy. But when that ice goes, that means there's going to be a huge amount of land that is very fertile that can be used for agriculture. Okay, so without a doubt there will be changes, but not all of those changes are bad. Some areas will be less productive, some areas will become more desert-like, other areas will turn into highly productive, will be highly productive in the future. And that's the part that the media does not like to focus on.
Based on what you're saying, I have another question. That is, that if, for example, in Siberia, that the ice will melt, then at the end, we have some places like California that are having like higher temperatures and production is going down, and because they don't have enough water. Mm-hmm. So at the end, I think that in Siberia they don't have the technology that they have in California in order to produce. So at the end, I think that it could affect the amount of production and the food security, because we're producing less food in some place that is producing a lot of food, and we're going to start producing food in another place that don't produce like that.
Okay, so California is going to stop selling oranges, and they're going to start importing wheat from Siberia. For California, that's not necessarily good, but California can focus on other things. They have Hollywood, they have Silicon Valley, It's not like everybody's going to be out of work and with nothing to do. Even if California had enough water, most of the land that was highly productive in the San Joaquin Valley, they've ruined it. So the agricultural disaster that's looming for California has nothing to do with climate change, but with the fact that they've put too much salt in the soil, that they haven't been taking care of the soil and using non-sustainable methods.
Okay. So my next question is does the effects of climate change could be in two ways? Either the temperature will rise or it can also decline. So knowing this, what effect do you think that will affect the agriculture sector the most?
Right now, the trend is rising. Rising is much better for agriculture than if it was falling. Falling temperatures, you would not have the ice sheet in Siberia, you would have the ice sheet in Florida. Okay? Basically, you would be, with much colder temperatures, expanding ice sheets, you would have a lot less land available for agriculture. That would be a much more serious crisis.
Okay. And if we divide agriculture on production of plants and also the part of production of animals, what sector would you think that will be the most affected by climate change and why?
Good question. I haven't really thought about that very much. We generally think in terms of plants. The animals that would be most affected, and in a positive way, will be reptiles. Basically, the reason for the extinction of the dinosaurs was the cooling of the climate. One of the things that limits reptiles and limits their growth is temperature. They need to go out in the sun and warm up, and so you would have iguanas, alligators, a lot of reptiles that can grow a lot faster, that will have much better conditions. So meanwhile, things like the amphibians, they're having a harder time. They need water, and so if things dry up, they have a harder time coping. So some animals will benefit, some will be hurt.
But in terms of...
in terms of food production?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of food production, I could foresee switching more towards fish and seafood. There are a lot of fish, they're cold-blooded, warmer temperatures. The tilapia here at Zamorano would grow twice as fast if that water was 2 degrees warmer. Okay? It's too cold. So they sell the tilapia when they're this big instead of this big. Okay? So we'll probably have less production of beef, probably less production of chickens, more production of fish, more production of reptiles like alligators, iguanas, which are also perfectly acceptable food, and they don't require as much food per pound of meat that you produce.
Okay. And if we keep dividing these two sectors, the production of plants and also production of animals, what sector what sector will have a bigger contribution to the 14% that we know that agriculture in generally give to the production of emissions of greenhouse gases, I mean?
I'm not sure I follow your question.
Okay. There is a 14% of total emissions of greenhouse gases that the agriculture apart to the total emissions of greenhouse gases in the world.
The contribution to the total,
yeah.
which is more The animals or the plants? The animals, of course, because the animals are not photosynthesizing. So plants compensate a lot. They're removing a lot of CO2 by photosynthesizing and producing wood or leafy matter. Every animal is constantly breathing, constantly turning sugars into carbon dioxide.
Okay, so what do you think that we can do in order to reduce the emissions that these animals give upwards?
Well, precisely, use animals with lower metabolic rates. So, as I mentioned before, fish, or focus agricultural production on fish, on shellfish like shrimp, or that have lower metabolic rates. They need to breathe less, they breathe more slowly, they don't produce as much CO2, they don't require as much food, and you can produce the meat more efficiently, quite simply.
And fish and those ocean animals, they can also be sold in a lower price, don't you think?
The price is a matter of the market, supply and demand. Okay? If human populations keep growing, the price will go up. If we overproduce, the price goes down. So I don't see that the price will have much to do with it. You might have a savings in the farm that it costs less to produce a pound of fish than a pound of beef, but if you can sell the fish for a high price, you're going to sell it for a high price.
Okay, if climate change is causing increased uncertainty about future temperature and precipitation regimes, making riskier all type of investment in agriculture due to the dependence that agriculture have in the weather. So, in your opinion, what are the repercussions of this problematic on food security?
Good question. World food security, I don't think is a problem because the types of weather effects that affect agricultural production tend to be local phenomena. That means it might be a bad year with drought in Honduras or Central America, but in Africa or Europe or North America, they're having a good year at the same time, so it compensates. So it's not like it's a global phenomenon that things are bad everywhere. It's a give and take. Some regions profit, some regions suffer. It's not good if you're in the suffering end, but that's the reality of it. What makes a lot of sense, precisely the topic that I was talking with the previous person about, is rather than the current production methods, which are based on economy of scale, make everything, make the farms bigger, make them more efficient by increasing the volume, go the opposite way, diversify. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't bet on coffee alone, but put some money on coffee, some money on corn, some money on beans, some on chickens, okay? And then one of them might not work, but you won't lose everything.
Okay. So it seems also that climate change is affecting the distribution of plants, but it also is affecting the distribution of plagues and insects. How do you think that this could affect the agricultural sector?
Mm, right now, most of the effects on insects are actually, a lot of insects are extending their ranges. Um, it's more like things that were formerly limited by cold conditions can now move further north. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Africanized bees can now go up to Canada, not necessarily good. Fire ants can now move further north from Texas. But as bees move further north, they can pollinate crops in a larger area. So I don't see a net positive or a net negative. Different species are going to be affected in different ways, and there are pros and cons.
Okay, and one of those pros or cons could be that the lakes on I can say current, for example, can move not only for the places that were, but not to another place that they don't have to control there. So at the end, with the agriculture of scale, then those countries will have to apply to another insect that they don't have before.
Possibly, yeah. Basically what will probably happen, each plant has its pollinators. As the climate changes and that plant needs to move to a different area, the pollinators will move with it, okay, because they're looking for the same climatic conditions, and both are capable of movement. It's not like they're going to move from South America to Africa. It's more like they'll move a little further north each year, say 10 kilometers per year north. That's quite possible for a butterfly, a bee, or seeds to disperse. So it's happened in the past. Each time there's an ice age, there were lots of major movements north and south. Nature knows how to take care of those changes. It adapts.
So another question would be that climate change put in risk current farming processes, as we know it, like for example scale agriculture that you already said.
Yeah.
And as a result, it also threatens food security.
Right. Right on the first part, wrong on the second part. Food security right now is a concept that is used to spread alarm. Okay, what could be worse than not having enough food? But what they don't say is that right now we have twice as much food as we need. Okay, if we produce half as much, there's still enough to feed the world. It's just we can't waste as much as we do. We have to think differently about what we do with our food. We have to think differently about how to produce the food. What we need to do is be adaptable. We have to, when we're faced with change, we need to change with it, okay? Not that everything has to stay exactly the way it is because we know what to do in the present conditions. Change is normal. Change is what has always happened on the planet. There have not been long periods where nothing changed. We're the only ones who have this idea that things can't change.
So at the end, if you said that we have enough food, then what's wrong is the distribution and that we waste a lot of food.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. And the last question is that if we assume that farmers' strategies fail to adapt to new systems of agriculture, how do you think that mass migration of people from the rural areas to the cities will affect on the economy of the country?
Well, the mass migration is already an ongoing phenomenon independent of climate change. So that's not anything new or different. The focus of people on cities and industrialization. I'm maybe not an expert on that. Cities and governments are trying to figure out how to handle that. Okay, governments are always having problems with there are not enough roads, the roads are not big enough, they can't handle the traffic. Those are ongoing problems, not really related to climate change. As far as farmers not being willing to adapt to change, my bet is they'll adapt. Simply because if your neighbor is adapting and doing well, you'd be very stupid not to, okay? It's basically a model of natural selection on farmers. The ones who adapt are going to be the ones who survive. And if you don't adapt, your neighbor's going to buy your farm.
Okay, thank you for this interview. And after all these questions, my conclusion would be that it's real that climate change is affecting in some way the production of food, and also it can be making some plagues and insects to move. But at the end, the planet is going to be the one that will accept the changes that it have in order to survive, and will need to do the same thing. So thank you, Doctor, for